Maya Whitfield had never interrupted a grown-up sentence in her life, but she had also never watched a courtroom decide to throw her father away like a piece of paper nobody needed anymore. "Let my father go," she said, and her voice did not shake the way she thought it would. The bailiff turned. 3 lawyers turned. The court reporter's fingers stopped over the keys. Somewhere behind her, a folding chair scraped against the floor as someone half rose and then thought better of it. "And if you let him go," Maya said, "I'll make you walk again." Laughter moved through the gallery in a low ripple, the kind of laughter that isn't cruel on purpose, just careless, the laughter of people who have already decided how the day is going to end. "Maya, no." Daniel Whitfield's hand found his daughter's wrist, gentle, urgent. "Baby, sit down. Please don't do this for me." "Your Honor." The prosecutor, a narrow man named Carl Esposito, who wore his confidence like a second suit, did not bother lowering his voice. "I'd ask that this interruption be removed from the courtroom. We are in sentencing, not theater." Judge Marion Castellane sat behind the bench in a wheelchair that had become so familiar to this courtroom that most people forgot it was there at all, the way you forget a piece of furniture that's been in the same room for 9 years. Her robes were black. Her face was stone. Her eyes, when they finally moved to the 9-year-old standing in the aisle, were not unkind, but they were not warm either. "Young lady, you have exactly 1 minute to return to your seat, or the bailiff will escort you out." "I'm not scared of being escorted out." Maya's chin came up. "I'm scared of what happens if nobody listens before you decide. My daddy didn't steal anything from Sable and Crane. Somebody wanted it to look like he did, and you already made up your mind before you heard the part that matters. This child is disrupting a federal sentencing hearing," Esposito snapped. "I move that, Mr. Esposito." Judge Castellane's voice cut through as like a blade through water. She had not raised it at all. "I will decide what disrupts my courtroom. Sit down." He sat down. The judge looked at Maya for a long moment, the kind of long moment that feels longer than it is. "You have 30 seconds. Convince me I shouldn't have you removed." "My daddy was at Pinecrest Children's Hospital the night they say he moved that money," Maya said. "I was there. I had a bad asthma attack, and they had to admit me." He held my hand the whole night. "There are nurses. There are cameras. There's a sign-in sheet at the front desk with his name and the time he signed it. How could he be stealing money from a building across town if he never let go of my hand?" The laughter in the gallery had gone very quiet. "Your Honor, this is," Esposito started. "What hospital?" Judge Castellane said, not to Esposito, to Maya. "Pinecrest. Room 311. 3rd floor." "And do you have a name for one of these nurses?" "Coretta. Nurse Coretta Banks. She sang with my daddy, so I'd fall asleep. She said she'd never seen a father do that before, stay through the whole night, without even going down for coffee." Judge Castellane was quiet for 3 full seconds, which in a courtroom is an eternity. "This court will recess for 1 hour, she said. "I want the patient admission records from Pinecrest Children's Hospital for the night in question on my desk before we resume. Mr. Esposito, I would suggest you pray those records contradict this child, because if they don't, you and I are going to have a very different conversation than the one we were planning to have today. If this little girl's courage has already touched your heart, take just a second to subscribe to the channel. We tell stories where ordinary people change lives with extraordinary bravery. But what happened after the courtroom recessed? No one saw coming. The holding room they put Maya in had a water cooler and a poster about courtroom etiquette and absolutely nothing else. Her father sat across from her in his orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, and for the first time since his arrest 11 weeks ago, Daniel Whitfield looked at his daughter like he didn't know whether to be furious or fall apart. 11 weeks ago, he had been a man who believed, fully and without question, that doing the work right was its own kind of safety. 15 years at Sable and Crane Capital had taught him the rhythm of an honest day. Before the sun most mornings, the only manager who knew every name on the loading dock and every name in the executive suite, the one people called when a number didn't add up, because he was the one who would actually sit with it until it did. He had built that reputation one early morning at a time. He had believed The way a man believes the floor will hold him, that the company he gave 15 years to would notice when something was wrong and want, as badly as he did, to fix it. That belief was the blind spot, and it had taken him most of those 15 years to even recognize it as one. He had trained himself to trust the chain above him, flag the irregularity, report it up, let the people, with more authority and more information, decide what to do next. He had never once imagined that the chain above him might be the thing creating the irregularity in the first place, or that the same instinct that made him good at his job, noticing what didn't belong, could be the exact thing that made him a liability someone wanted gone. The first odd thing had been small enough to ignore. A client account, designated only by a number, routed through 4 different shell entities in 9 days, more activity in that single week than the account had shown in the previous 2 years combined. Daniel had flagged it the way he flagged everything, through the proper internal channel, expecting a thank you, or at worst a shrug. What he got instead was a one-line email from his supervisor: "Let it go. That account gets different treatment." He should have let it go. He told himself that now, sitting in an orange jumpsuit, with his daughter's small hand gripping his, through the table's edge. But the second odd thing came 2 weeks later, a wire authorization, with his digital signature on it for a transfer he had never approved, dated to a Tuesday he remembered clearly, because Maya had a dentist appointment that morning and he hadn't even been in the building until 11. The badge logs would have proven it, if anyone had bothered to check them before deciding he was guilty. The third thing was the small leather notebook. He started it not because he suspected what was coming, but because some old instinct from his own father, a man who'd kept every receipt of his small construction business in a tin box his whole life, who used to say a number written on paper can't be hacked, only stolen, and stealing leaves a hole somebody eventually notices, told him that if the company's systems could produce a forged signature out of nowhere, the company's systems were not where the truth was going to survive. He wrote down every transfer he flagged, by hand, in pencil, with the date, the account number, and the name on whatever authorization crossed his desk. He told no one, not his supervisor, not, at first, even Renee. By the time federal agents arrived at his office, with a warrant, 8 weeks after that first email telling him to let it go, Daniel understood, too late to stop it, just in time to start documenting it differently, that he had not been looking at a careless mistake. He had been looking at a structure with a very specific use for people like him, people who noticed things and then could be made, quietly and thoroughly, to stop being believed. "Maya, sweetheart, why didn't you tell anyone about the hospital before now?" "I told Mr. Reyes, her court-appointed lawyer. He said the financial records mattered more than where you were standing. He said the prosecutor had your login, your password, transaction timestamps. He said an alibi from a 9-year-old wasn't going to move a judge who already had a stack of digital evidence 3 inches thick." Daniel's jaw worked. He had spent 11 weeks learning that the system did not particularly want to hear him. He had spent 15 years before that as the operations manager at Sable and Crane Capital, the kind of job where you come in early, you stay late, you catch other people's mistakes before they become the company's mistakes, and you trust, because what else is there to trust, that if you do the work honestly, the work will eventually speak for you. It had not spoken for him. It had been used against him. "They froze our login credentials weeks before the audit even started," he said quietly. "I told Reyes that too. Nobody wanted to hear that either." "Somebody wanted you convicted no matter what was true," Maya said. "Mama said that. She said somebody picked you on purpose." Daniel didn't answer. He was thinking about the small leather notebook in the bottom drawer of his desk at home, the one Renee didn't know the full weight of, the one he'd started keeping for months before his arrest, the night he noticed a transfer routed through an account that didn't match any client file he'd ever seen. He had not trusted the company's systems to keep an honest record. He had written it down by hand instead, the old way, the way his own father had taught him to keep a ledger before computers could be hacked, edited, or quietly disappeared. He had never told anyone where it was, not even Renee. Nurse Coretta Banks had worked the pediatric floor at Pinecrest for 11 years, and she had never once been called back to a court case after giving her statement to police, which, looking back later, was the detail that should have bothered her immediately and didn't. Yes, Your Honor. I was on duty that night. Do you recall Daniel Whitfield? I remember him very well. His daughter was struggling to breathe, and he didn't leave her side once. Not for coffee, not for a phone call, not for anything. He sang to her until she fell asleep. I told my husband about it when I got home. I said I'd never seen a father stay that still through that much fear. Did he, at any point, leave the hospital that night? No, sir, Your Honor. I checked his location myself more than once because I make rounds. He was in that chair every single time I looked. And you gave this statement to the police originally. I did. Detective wrote it all down. Asked me to sign it. Then I never heard from anybody again. I thought that was strange, but I figured my part wasn't important. Judge Castellane's hands, resting on the arms of her wheelchair, had gone very still. Mr. Esposito, did this statement appear anywhere in the discovery file provided to this court? Esposito's silence answered before his mouth did. Your Honor, I was given the case file by the Eastfield Police Financial Crimes Unit. If an alibi statement was omitted, that omission did not originate with my office. Then someone omitted evidence that would have cleared a man facing 12 years in federal prison, Judge Castellane said. And I intend to find out who. Detective work, Judge Castellane had learned a long time ago, was just patience wearing a badge. It took the court's investigator 4 days to pull the full digital trail behind the case against Daniel Whitfield, and what he found did not point to a sloppy mistake. It pointed to a pattern. Your Honor, the login used to authorize the suspicious transfers came from Whitfield's terminal, the investigator said, laying printouts across her desk. But the building's badge access system shows his badge was never swiped that night. Someone else was sitting at his desk. Who had access to his terminal without his badge? That's the question. IT logs show a remote override was used to unlock the workstation. The override came from an administrator account that's supposed to require dual sign-off. There was only one signature on it. Whose? It traces back to a contractor account set up 6 months before the transfer started. Paid out of a shell account linked to, he turned a page, Sable, and Crane's outside compliance consultant. A man named Andrew Vale. Judge Castellane had sat on this bench for 9 years. She had learned to recognize the particular quiet that settles over a room when a case stops being about one man and starts being about a structure built to use men like him. Bring Mr. Vale in, she said, quietly. I don't want him to know we're looking yet. They never got the chance. Andrew Vale's car was found 2 days later at the bottom of an embankment off Route 9, nose down in 6 feet of water, the windows shattered from impact. The Eastfield County Coroner's Office called it a single-vehicle accident, no other cars involved, no skid marks suggesting another vehicle forced him off the road. Judge Castellane did not believe in coincidences that arrived exactly when they were inconvenient for the truth. Bring me everything Vale touched in the last year, she told her clerk. Every consulting contract, every wire authorization, every signature. What came back over the following week was not a man's sloppy mistake. It was a system. 14 other cases, 14, going back 6 years, followed the exact same architecture. A competent employee at Sable and Crane Capital noticed a discrepancy, asked a question they weren't supposed to ask, and within months found themselves facing criminal charges built on evidence that materialized out of nowhere. A senior accountant named Patricia Renfro had served 18 months for embezzlement before the real numbers surfaced, after her career, her marriage, and her name were already gone. A junior compliance officer named Terrence Ojeda, a man whose only crime was asking why a single account moved $11 million through 4 jurisdictions in 9 days, had been quietly fired and discredited before charges were even filed, so thoroughly that no one believed a word he said afterward. Every single one of them had touched the same account cluster. Every single one of them had been silenced before they could say why. Your Honor, her clerk's voice, when he finally spoke, had lost its usual steadiness. This isn't one bad employee skimming money. This is laundering, and it goes through people with real power. There's a councilman's name on 3 of the shell entities. There's a captain in the Eastfield PD Financial Crimes Unit who closed 2 of these cases personally, the same unit that handled Whitfield's arrest. Councilman Hartman. Yes, ma'am. And the captain? Walter Doyle. Judge Castellane looked out the window of her chambers at the parking lot below, at the ordinary cars belonging to ordinary people who had no idea how close the floor beneath their city had come to giving out. Then we are not looking at a man who panicked and made one bad decision, she said. We are looking at a machine that has been running for years, and it just made the mistake of trying to run over a 9-year-old girl's father in front of a judge who was finally paying attention again. She had not always paid attention. That was the part Judge Castellane did not say out loud, not yet, not even to her clerk. 11 years ago, before the chair, before the long silence she had mistaken for peace, she had been a federal prosecutor investigating a financial network she could never quite prove existed. A network that moved money through shell companies tied to political donors and law enforcement contracts, always one signature away from anyone she could indict. 3 weeks after she requested a subpoena that would have opened the company's full books, her car's brakes failed on a mountain road outside the city. She had walked away from that crash with her life and without the use of her legs, and the official report had called it mechanical failure, a worn brake line, an accident. She had believed that for 11 years. She had let it close something in her, not just her legs, but the part of her that used to ask why instead of just following the evidence she was handed. She had become, without ever choosing the word for it, exactly the kind of judge who sentences first and listens later. Until a 9-year-old girl stood up in her courtroom and told her, with no evidence at all except a child's stubborn faith, that she would walk again if she did the right thing. It should have meant nothing. It was a child's promise, the kind adults are supposed to smile at and forget. But 3 nights after Maya Whitfield said it, Judge Castellane woke at 2 in the morning with a sensation in her left foot she had not felt in 11 years. Not pain, not even strength, just the faint, impossible ghost of a nerve remembering it was alive. She told no one. She assumed it was nothing, a trick of circulation, an old injury settling. By the 5th night, she could move her toes. By the 8th, with effort and her hands braced white-knuckled on the arms of a chair, she could stand for 4 seconds before her legs gave out beneath her. She did not call it a miracle, not even privately. She called it what her years on the bench had taught her to call anything she couldn't yet explain, a development requiring further investigation. But she also understood, in the part of herself she'd kept locked since the crash, exactly what had reopened the door. It was not magic. It was the decision to start asking why again, and the body, it seemed, had been waiting just as long as the conscience had for permission to come back to life. Stories like this remind us that hope often appears when we least expect it. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about justice, faith, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe. Because the biggest truth in this case is still waiting to be uncovered. Walter Doyle gave you these case files. Captain Doyle stood very straight in the doorway of his own office, while 2 federal agents went through his filing cabinets, and he kept his voice level the way a man does when he has practiced staying calm under exactly this kind of pressure. I closed those cases because the evidence supported closing them, Your Honor. I don't appreciate the implication. The implication, Judge Castellane said, is that you closed 14 cases against 14 different people, every one of whom happened to discover something inconvenient about Sable and Crane Capital before you arrested them. That is not an implication, Captain. That is a pattern, and patterns do not require my imagination. They require my eyesight. You're building a conspiracy out of paperwork. I'm building a conspiracy out of paperwork that has Councilman Hartman's signature on shell company filings, your unit's case closures protecting the same company 8 separate times, and a dead consultant who happened to die 3 days after my court started asking the question you're standing here trying to talk me out of asking. Doyle's eyes flicked, just once, toward the agent removing a box from his bottom drawer. It was a small movement. It told her everything. Captain Doyle, you are being relieved of duty pending a federal investigation into obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. I would suggest you secure a lawyer who does not also represent Sable and Crane Capital. Reggie Hartman had been a city councilman for 16 years, And in that time he had learned that most problems could be made to disappear with the right phone call to the right person, made quietly, made early, before anyone outside a small circle ever knew there was a problem at all. This was not a problem that could be made to disappear with a phone call. You said this was contained, he hissed into his phone, pacing the length of his office, blinds drawn against a city that did not yet know what was coming for it. You said Vale's death closed the loop. It would have, Victor Sable said, his voice flat, controlled, the voice of a man who had built an empire by never sounding afraid even when he was. If a federal judge hadn't decided to take a child's tantrum seriously, then handle the judge. We tried handling judges before, Reggie. Look how well that worked out for her legs the first time. We are not making that mistake twice in 1 decade. Not with federal eyes already on us. Then what do? We give them Doyle. We give them the dead man. We make it look small, contained, 3 bad actors acting alone, nothing that touches the boardroom. We bury the rest, so deep it stays buried. Hartman stopped pacing. Through the gap in his blinds, he could see the federal courthouse 3 blocks east, the same building where, 16 years ago, he had stood on the steps for his first swearing-in and promised a crowd of people who believed in him that he would never let this city's institutions be used against the people they were built to protect. He had believed himself when he said it. That was the part that would have surprised people who only knew him from the news coverage that was coming. He had believed it for at least the first 2 years. And if they don't stop at Doyle, he said, if the judge keeps pulling, then we find out how far a 9-year-old's testimony actually holds up under real pressure, Sable said. Children change their stories, Reggie, especially when their father's freedom depends on them getting nervous in front of enough lawyers. That's a line we have not crossed before. We have not needed to before. A pause, cold enough that Hartman could feel it through the phone. Don't tell me you're developing a conscience 3 indictments too late. What Victor Sable did not know, could not have known, sitting in his glass office 40 floors above a city he believed he owned, was that Daniel Whitfield had been writing in a small leather notebook for 4 months before his arrest, recording every irregular transfer he noticed in longhand, in pencil, in a format no remote override could ever delete. And he did not know that the night before his arrest, sensing without proof that something had turned dangerous around him, Daniel had mailed that notebook, plain padded envelope, no return address, to the one person in his life he trusted completely, with something he could not protect himself. His wife's sister, a postal worker in Macon, 200 miles away, who had no idea what she was holding, and had simply put the unopened envelope in a drawer because her brother-in-law had asked her to keep it safe and not ask questions. Daniel. Renee's voice on the phone was tight, careful, pitched low so Maya wouldn't hear from the next room. The lawyer says the judge wants to know if you have any documentation, anything, before the next hearing. Daniel sat in the visitor's room of the county facility, the orange jumpsuit somehow heavier every week he wore it, and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in 11 weeks. The notebook, he said. Renee, listen to me carefully. Call your sister in Macon. Tell her to open the envelope I mailed her in March. Tell her not to touch anything inside, with bare hands, if she can help it, and to get it to my lawyer the same day. What's in it? 4 months of every transaction I flagged, before they ever accused me of anything. Dates, account numbers, the names on the wire authorizations. I wrote it by hand, because I didn't trust their computers, and I didn't trust myself to remember it, if something happened to me, before I could prove it. There was a long silence on the line. You knew, Renee said. You knew something like this could happen, and you didn't tell me. I didn't want you carrying it too. I wanted you, and Maya somewhere safe, if I was wrong about how dangerous it was. You weren't wrong. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. Daniel, you weren't wrong. 11 weeks, and I kept telling myself you'd made a mistake somewhere, some account you misread, some number you transposed, because the alternative was that somebody did this to you on purpose, and I couldn't. I didn't know how to carry that and still get Maya to school every morning like everything was fine. You didn't have to carry it alone. You're not carrying it alone now. I called Denise an hour ago. She said the envelope's been sitting in her hallway drawer since March. She thought it was insurance papers. She almost threw it out twice when she was cleaning. Renee laughed, short and disbelieving, the kind of laugh that arrives right next to tears. For months, Daniel. The thing that's going to save your life has been sitting in your sister-in-law's junk drawer in Macon for 4 months. Then it's a good thing she's not much of a cleaner. It wasn't really funny. They both let themselves laugh anyway, because the alternative, after 11 weeks, was something neither of them could afford to feel all the way through on a recorded visitation line. Get it to Reyes today, Daniel said. Don't wait for tomorrow. I don't trust how fast things can disappear once people know they exist. Renee didn't have to ask him what he meant by that. She had read the same news report he had, 2 days earlier, about a consultant named Andrew Vale, whose car had gone into a ravine off Route 9. She had not made the connection out loud to anyone, not even to her sister, but she had felt it the moment she read it, the particular cold of understanding that whatever her husband had stumbled into went further and reached higher than either of them had let themselves believe. Today, she said. I promise you today. The notebook arrived at Reyes's office on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon it sat on Judge Castellane's desk inside a sealed evidence bag. 41 pages of careful, dated, handwritten record, a paper trail that no remote login override, no deleted email, no drowned consultant could erase, because it had never touched a single server Victor Sable's people controlled. Your Honor, Reyes stood at the defense table, and for the first time in 11 weeks his voice did not sound like a man bracing for another loss. This notebook documents transfers beginning 4 months before my client's arrest, in his own handwriting, matching dates and account numbers that the prosecution's own forensic accountants have already confirmed exist. My client did not commit the fraud he is accused of. He documented it. He tried to report it through internal channels and was told, in writing, he held up a printed email by his direct supervisor to, quote, let it go. That account gets different treatment. Esposito did not object. There was nothing left to object to. This court is reconvening Mr. Whitfield's case not as a sentencing hearing, Judge Castellane said, but as the opening proceeding in what I expect will become the largest financial corruption prosecution this state has seen in a decade. Mr. Whitfield's charges are dismissed, effective immediately, with this court's formal apology for the harm done to him and his family. If this moment brought a smile to your face, we'd love to have you join our community by subscribing. Every story we share is a reminder that truth, courage, and kindness can change lives. And this family's journey isn't over just yet. The cuffs came off in the courtroom this time, in front of everyone, and Maya crossed the gallery rail before the bailiff could stop her and put both arms around her father's neck like she intended never to let go again. You did it, she said into his shoulder. Daddy, you did it. No, baby. His voice broke on the words. You did it. You're the one who stood up. Victor Sable, Reggie Hartman, and the now former Captain Walter Doyle were arrested within the same week on charges that ran from racketeering and securities fraud to obstruction of justice and conspiracy in connection with Andrew Vale's death, which a reopened investigation would ultimately rule a homicide staged to resemble an accident. 14 other dismissed and overturned cases followed in the months after. 14 people who had spent years carrying convictions for crimes they never committed. 14 families who had been told, in one form or another, that the system had already decided they didn't matter enough to be believed. Patricia Renfro, the accountant who'd lost 18 months of her life and her marriage along with it, stood outside the federal courthouse on the day of her exoneration and told a reporter that she had stopped believing anyone would ever say her name without the word convicted attached to it. Terrence Ojeda, finally able to clear a record that had followed him through 6 years of unanswered job applications, used part of his settlement to start a small consulting firm that specialized in exactly the kind of internal audits no one had wanted to hear from him about the first time. Judge Marion Castellane stood, fully, on her own, no chair, no rail, at the press conference announcing the federal indictments, and when a reporter asked her how, after 11 years, she explained leaning forward in front of the cameras, with her hand resting on the small girl beside her. I'm not a doctor, And I won't pretend to understand everything that happened in my own body these last few weeks, she said. What I can tell you is that I stopped asking why a long time ago, because asking why had cost me something I thought I could never get back. A child reminded me that the cost of staying quiet is usually higher than the cost of asking. I started asking again. The rest, I'll let people smarter than me explain. But I know who taught me to stand up before I ever stood up on my own 2 feet again. She did not look at the cameras when she said the last part. She looked at Maya. 3 months later, Sable and Crane Capital's headquarters reopened under new ownership and a court-mandated compliance structure with federal monitors embedded in every department that touched client funds for the next 5 years. The city council seat once held by Reggie Hartman sat empty pending a special election, and the financial crimes unit Walter Doyle had run for 9 years was placed under outside review. Every closed case from his tenure reopened for a second look. Daniel Whitfield did not go back to Sable and Crane. He didn't need to. The settlement from the wrongful prosecution, combined with a job offer from a compliance firm that wanted exactly the kind of operations manager who kept handwritten records nobody could delete, gave his family the kind of stability that 11 weeks in a county facility had nearly taken from them for good. He still kept a notebook. Different one now, different reason, not evidence against anyone, just the small, ordinary record of a father who had learned the hard way that some things are worth writing down by hand, in your own words, where no one else can reach them. On the first night back in their own house, with Maya finally asleep in her own bed instead of a hospital cot or a visitation room chair, Daniel sat at the edge of her mattress the way he had 1,000 nights before the arrest and said the same thing he had always said to her before sleep, the sentence she had carried with her all the way into a federal courtroom and used like a key. Truth doesn't need permission to be true, he murmured. It just needs someone brave enough to say it. Maya, half asleep, smiled without opening her eyes. I know, Daddy, she said. I was brave enough. Yes, Daniel said, and for the first time in 11 weeks, he let himself believe it completely. You were. The Maya Whitfield Foundation for Wrongful Conviction Families opened its doors the following spring, funded in part by Daniel's settlement, and in part by an anonymous gift that arrived with no note except a single line, typed on plain paper. Some debts can only be repaid forward. It offered legal aid, counseling, and, first on every list of services, the thing Maya herself had insisted on when her father asked what mattered most, a place for the children of the wrongly accused to be heard before anyone decided their story didn't matter. Judge Castellane sat on its board. She walked into every meeting on her own 2 feet, and she never once let the room forget why.